Redditor 1. I've never told anyone this before, but I've seen UFOs. More than one. And each one has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about our world. It all started on a night when I was completely alone, deep in the quiet solitude of a remote field outside town. I had taken a drive by myself after a long, tiresome day at work, seeking a moment of peace away from the incessant hum of city life. The sky was a vast, inky canvas, and somewhere among the countless stars, I saw it, a huge, circular formation of strobing, colored lights, with one large white light pulsing in the center. I remember pulling over on a deserted stretch of road, the engine of my old sedan idling softly as I stepped out into the cool night. The air was heavy with moisture, and a light fog clung to the ground, distorting the familiar outlines of trees and distant hills. My heart pounded as I approached the side of the road, eyes fixed on the strange, mesmerizing display above. The circle of lights was unlike anything I had ever seen. Vibrant bursts of red, blue, and green danced around the perimeter, their rhythms almost musical in their precision, while that dominant white beacon in the center pulsed steadily, as if it were calling out for attention. For what felt like an eternity, I just stood there, frozen, as if the very air around me had thickened and time had slowed down. I fumbled for my phone to capture a photo, but the device's screen only managed to register a blur, a testament to how quickly the image dissolved into the night. I remember the overwhelming mix of awe and terror that gripped me. It was as though the universe had peeled back its veil for just a brief, inexplicable moment, revealing something profoundly alien and yet mesmerizingly beautiful. That solitary encounter stayed with me for months, a memory I revisited in my quiet moments. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if exhaustion or stress had conjured up a hallucination. But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real, as tangible as the damp night air against my skin. Then, about a year later, I experienced something that shook me to my core. A second sighting that I witnessed with my older brother while we were in the car. It was one of those cool, clear nights in upstate New York, the kind where the stars shine with an almost blinding clarity. My brother was driving along a winding country road, and I was riding shotgun, nervously tapping my fingers on the seat, half expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But then, out of the blue, I noticed a hovering light high in the sky, almost directly above the city lights in the distance. At first, it was just a single, steady light, seemingly suspended in the heavens without any discernible movement. I nudged my brother and pointed upward. He glanced at it through the windshield, and his face went pale as he realized what I was seeing. The light was unnervingly bright, a soft, white glow that defied the natural luminescence of any star or airplane. Then, as if orchestrated by some unseen conductor, another light approached the hovering one. It swooped up with a deliberate grace, flying directly over the first light before doing something that sent chills down my spine. A massive U-turn around the hovering light and then retreating in the direction it had come from. I can still recall the exact moment. The second light, moving with an almost predatory speed, seemed to circle the hovering beacon before the latter started to move in the opposite direction. It was as if the two lights were engaged in some kind of silent, cosmic dance, a chase that defied logic and earthly physics. I remember my hands clenching the seatbelt, my heart pounding so fiercely I thought it might burst through my chest. My brother's eyes were wide with terror, and I could see the same mix of disbelief and dread mirrored in his face. The car's interior was awash with the eerie glow from the lights outside. Every time the second light made its sweeping U-turn, the hovering light would change direction, as though repelled by its presence. It was a chase, a silent pursuit unfolding in real time, right above our heads. We sat in that car, breath held, as if we were witnessing a secret meant only for us, a secret that unraveled before our eyes and left us utterly helpless in its wake. After several minutes that stretched on interminably, the second light finally vanished, disappearing into the darkness without a sound. The hovering light, however, continued its slow, deliberate movement before eventually fading into the distance, swallowed by the vast, starry sky. My brother and I remained in the car for a long while after that, neither of us daring to speak as the adrenaline slowly ebbed from our veins. The silence was oppressive, It felt as though the night itself had absorbed the memory of what had just occurred, leaving behind only questions and a gnawing sense of vulnerability. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I spent nights obsessively looking up at the sky, desperate for another glimpse of those inexplicable lights, hoping for some kind of explanation or confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind. But the heavens remained silent and indifferent, offering no answers, only the cold, unyielding constancy of distant stars. My friends would later dismiss these encounters as overactive imaginations or mere tricks of the light, but I knew what I had seen was real. The memory of that solitary, strobing circle with its central white beacon and the horrifying, impossible chase I witnessed with my brother have both etched themselves into my very being. I still question what they were, perhaps advanced craft beyond our understanding, or mere optical illusions conjured by a mind on the brink. I lean towards the former, convinced that somewhere out there something exists that defies our conventional explanations. Even now, on nights when the air is still and the sky a deep, impenetrable black, I sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of a light that seems to echo those earlier encounters. My heart tightens, and I am transported back to that moment in the car, that dreadful silence punctuated only by the impossible ballet of lights overhead. And I wonder, are these events isolated anomalies, or are they part of a greater, more sinister design that we're only beginning to comprehend? I try to push these thoughts aside as I go about my daily routine. Late-night drives, quiet dinners, mundane work in an office where the hum of computers replaces the symphony of the unknown. Yet, every so often, when the world falls into its predictable rhythm, the memory of that night creeps back in, a ghostly reminder that the universe holds secrets far beyond our reach. I've never shared these stories openly, for fear that others would dismiss them as mere fantasy. But sometimes, late at night, when the city lights are dim and the only sound is the beating of my own heart, I find myself yearning for a glimpse of that unexplainable wonder again. In those solitary moments, I allow myself to believe that what I witnessed was not a figment of an overactive imagination, but a genuine encounter, a brush with the extraordinary that challenges everything I once thought was true. So, whenever I look up at the sky, I do so with a mixture of longing and trepidation, knowing that each star might hide a secret, that each flicker of light could be a sign of something far more mysterious than our everyday world. And even though I've seen a few UFOs in my life, those two nights, the one where I stood alone and the one when my brother and I watched in frozen terror, will forever be the benchmark of the inexplicable. A chilling reminder that sometimes the unknown comes calling, and it's up to us to decide whether to run or to stand our ground. Redditor 2. I've never told anyone this before, but last winter something happened that still sends shivers down my spine. It was a bitter, cold night, one of those evenings where the frost clings to every surface and the sky is an endless, inky void. I was alone in my small apartment, huddled near the window with a thin blanket draped over my shoulders. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the old window frame, and the only light came from the dim street lamps far below. I had just finished a long day at work, my mind exhausted, and I intended to settle in for an early night. But as I sat there, lost in my thoughts, something in the darkness caught my eye. At first it was barely noticeable, a few erratic flickers of light that seemed to dance on the edge of my vision. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that the cold or my fatigue was playing tricks on me. Yet, the phenomenon persisted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a series of bright lights began to materialize in the sky. I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging the glass, and my heart started pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. There were 5 lights in total. 3 of them emerged from the north, their glow steady and cold, while one came from the south, its appearance sudden and almost deliberate. Then, as if summoned by some unseen force, a 5th light faded into view slowly, as if it were gradually lighting up. In that moment, all 5 lights arranged themselves into a pattern that was unmistakable, a perfect formation, exactly like the 5 on a die, with 1 light at each corner and 1 smack in the middle. I stood there, frozen, my fingers trembling against the window pane. The lights held their eerie formation for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was only a few seconds. The silence of the night was absolute, Even the usual sounds of the winter wind seemed to have ceased. In that void of sound, the sight of those lights became almost deafening in its strangeness. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights began to leave. The 3 lights from the north ascended upward into the cold darkness, vanishing into the starless sky. The light from the south, however, plummeted downward, disappearing below the horizon in an instant. And the 5th light, the one that had slowly come into view, faded away, its glow diminishing until it was nothing more than a memory in the darkness. I fumbled for my old handycam, desperate to capture any proof of what I had just witnessed. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely press the record button. I aimed the camera at the window, but the poor quality of the device and the overwhelming darkness rendered my footage nothing more than a series of blurry, unconvincing images. Even now, when I review the grainy video, nothing solid emerges, just hints of light and shadow that cannot explain the phenomenon. For days after that night, I replayed the event in my mind with obsessive clarity. I questioned whether my eyes had deceived me, whether I had imagined it all in the isolation of that cold winter night. But every time I glanced at the sky, I felt that lingering, unshakable chill. A dread that perhaps what I had seen was no mere trick of the light, but a real intrusion from something beyond our understanding. At work, I tried to act as if nothing was unusual, but I found myself distracted, constantly glancing out of office windows during meetings. My colleagues noticed my odd behavior and teased me lightly, calling it just a case of overactive imagination spurred by too many late nights. Yet I could not dismiss the experience. In the quiet moments of solitude, the memory of that perfect formation, a glowing 5, like a cosmic die, haunted me. I began to research UFO sightings online, reading through forums and reports of similar encounters. I found some accounts that echoed my own, tales of strange patterned lights that appeared in the dead of winter, leaving witnesses both terrified and mesmerized. I even started to question the nature of reality itself. What if the universe holds secrets that we are not meant to see? What if, in those rare moments, the boundary between our world and something far more mysterious thins, allowing a glimpse of something utterly alien? The thought both fascinated and terrified me. I began to doubt my own sanity, wondering if I was slipping into paranoia. But the memory was too vivid, too persistent, to be dismissed as mere fantasy. I spent sleepless nights trying to piece together every detail of that encounter. I recalled the way the wind had howled outside, the bitter cold that seeped through the cracks of the window, and the stark contrast between the dark sky and the bright, almost otherworldly lights. I remembered the precise pattern in which they appeared, a formation so symmetrical and deliberate that it felt as if it were designed with purpose, a message encoded in light. Sometimes, when the winter nights are especially long and the silence of the world seems to press in, I lie awake and stare out my window, half expecting to see that pattern reappear. I keep thinking of that fleeting moment when the universe revealed a glimpse of something beyond our mundane reality, a secret, a warning, or perhaps a challenge to our very understanding of existence. One particularly cold night, I ventured out to the local park, a desolate stretch of frozen ground, illuminated only by the weak glow of a single street lamp. The air was so still that my breath formed a mist in front of me, and every sound seemed magnified in the icy quiet. I walked slowly, my mind still fixated on the memory of that night, trying to rationalize the inexplicable. Maybe it was just a meteorological anomaly, a rare atmospheric condition that played tricks on my eyes. But deep down, I knew that what I had witnessed was different, something that defied easy explanation. I recall a moment when a sudden gust of wind stirred the trees, and I felt as though I heard a faint, almost imperceptible hum-hum, a sound not like any I had ever heard before. My heart hammered as I paused, straining to catch any further detail, but as quickly as the sound came, it vanished, leaving me alone with the haunting memory of that perfect, otherworldly formation. In the following weeks, I began to notice small, unsettling signs. I would catch fleeting reflections of strange patterned lights in the windows of nearby buildings, or see shadows moving in ways that defied the normal behavior of objects under the street lamps. I even started to dream about that night, vivid, surreal dreams where the glowing 5 reappeared, and I felt as if I were being drawn into a secret world beyond our own. In those dreams, I was both terrified and inexplicably drawn to the light, as if it held the answers to mysteries I had yet to understand. I tried discussing these experiences with friends and family, but most dismissed my recollections as the product of an overactive imagination or the lingering effects of sleep deprivation. My attempts to explain the precise formation, the way the 5 lights had arranged themselves like the number 5 on a die, were met with polite skepticism. Yet, every time I see the stars on a clear winter night, I am reminded of that perfect, eerie pattern, and I feel a surge of both wonder and dread. In my heart, I remain convinced that what I saw was real. I have come to accept that the universe might be far stranger than our everyday perceptions allow us to believe. Perhaps, in those rare, fleeting moments, something extraordinary slips through the cracks of our reality, a silent, deliberate message encoded in the light of distant stars. And while I may never know the full truth, that one winter night will forever serve as a haunting reminder that some secrets are meant to be glimpsed only for a moment before vanishing back into the endless darkness. Even now, I keep my old handycam tucked away in a drawer, a relic of that night that could have served as proof if only it had been good enough. Every time I pass by that window, my hands tremble and my heart races with the memory of that inexplicable sight. The thought that there might be more out there, watching us silently from the cold expanse of space, fills me with a persistent unease that I cannot shake. And so, every winter, as the nights grow longer and the stars shine brighter in the icy sky, I find myself glancing upward, half expecting to see that uncanny pattern reappear. A ghostly reminder that in the vast, unyielding darkness, we are never truly alone. Redditor 3. I've never told anyone this before, but 3 years ago, in the sultry heat of a July night at Algonquin National Park, I experienced something that still makes my skin crawl when I think back on it. It was around 3 a.m., an hour when the world is supposed to be wrapped in silence and the comforting darkness of sleep. Yet, I was wide awake. My family had all retreated into their tents, exhausted after a long day of hiking and laughter. I, however, had chosen to stay awake, drawn by the allure of the stars and the quiet crackle of our dwindling campfire. I remember sitting alone on a flat rock near the dying fire, its embers casting long, flickering shadows on the ground. The park around me was vast and unspoiled, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. I was mesmerized by the endless stretch of the night sky, each star a tiny, distant promise. The world seemed to slow down to a hush, leaving me with nothing but my thoughts and the simple beauty of nature. I felt small, yet inexplicably connected to the universe in a way that only those lonely, clear nights can evoke. Then, without warning, the peaceful tableau was shattered by a series of movements in the sky. I first noticed a faint glow near the horizon, a reddish-orangeal luminescence that cut through the black like a soft, burning ember. My heart skipped a beat as I strained my eyes to focus. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I realized that there were not one, but about 5 separate objects moving in a formation. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Instead of the steady, predictable path of a shooting star, or the blinking, erratic motion of a distant airplane, these objects moved with a strange, coordinated precision. They were heading in a roughly northward direction at first, their lights pulsing gently as if in silent communication with one another. I remember feeling a sudden, inexplicable unease as I watched them glide across the sky. The reddish-orange glow was intense, casting a warm, eerie light that made the inky void seem almost tangible. For about 10 seconds, 10 long, heart-stopping seconds, they held their formation, as if frozen in time. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they changed direction. The group turned toward the west, their movement smooth and deliberate, and then vanished from my view, as if swallowed by the darkness. I sat there, frozen on that rock, my pulse thundering in my ears and my mind racing with questions. Were those objects real? Had I just witnessed a secret maneuver of some unknown craft? Or was it all a trick of the light, a mirage conjured by the isolation and the depths of the night? Every rational explanation I attempted to formulate was drowned out by the overwhelming, chilling sense that I had seen something that defied all normalcy. I spent several moments in silence, the only sound the dying crackle of the campfire and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to rub them together, trying to dispel the cold that had seeped into my bones. I couldn't bring myself to call out to my family in their tents. What would I say? "Hey, wake up, there's a fleet of alien ships flying over us." The thought was absurd, yet the memory of those coordinated glowing objects was anything but. After a long time that felt like an eternity, I reluctantly stood up. I gathered what remained of the fire, just a few glowing embers, and trudged back toward my tent, my mind a chaotic storm of wonder and dread. The soft, familiar fabric of my sleeping bag did little to soothe the turbulent emotions inside me. Instead, every creak of the tent in the cool night breeze seemed to echo the silent departure of those mysterious lights. Lying in the dark, I forced myself to sleep, though the image of those 5 reddish-orange objects danced behind my closed eyelids. I awoke the next morning to the sound of birds chirping and the soft murmur of my family beginning their day, but I felt a deep, lingering chill that no sunlight could warm. I tried to shake it off as mere residual anxiety, a trick my mind played on me in the solitude of that night, but the memory was too vivid to ignore. In the days that followed, I found myself constantly glancing at the sky whenever I had a moment alone. I searched for any sign of the inexplicable formation, but the heavens remained unremarkable, just a canvas of familiar stars. I even tried to talk about it with my family, but they offered nothing more than a casual smile and a dismissive shrug, as if the encounter was nothing more than a strange dream. Yet, every time I saw a flash of reddish-orange light or the slow drift of a cloud, my heart would race, and I'd be transported back to that cold July night at Algonquin. I spent long hours scrolling through online forums and reading about UFO sightings and strange aerial phenomena. Some claimed it was a natural atmospheric anomaly. Others insisted it was evidence of something extraterrestrial. I read about formations in the sky that mimicked the geometry of a dice, patterns that seemed too precise, too orchestrated to be random. No explanation, however, resonated with me fully. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that there was a logical explanation, a trick of the light, or a rare meteorological phenomenon. But deep down, I felt that what I had witnessed was a genuine intrusion of the unknown into our mundane world. I began to question everything I thought I knew about reality. What if the universe held secrets that we are not meant to comprehend? What if, in the quiet moments of our lives, the cosmos reveals its hidden truths to those brave enough to look? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I would lie awake at night, haunted by the possibility that there are forces at work in the dark, orchestrating events that defy human understanding. There are times when I still catch a fleeting glimpse of something unusual out of the corner of my eye, a faint reddish glow near the horizon, a brief flash that vanishes before I can focus. In those moments, my breath catches, and I'm reminded of that night when the fire had died down and the sky had come alive with 5 mysterious objects. I know I'll never get a definitive answer, and perhaps that's part of the horror, the unending uncertainty, the constant possibility that somewhere out there, something extraordinary is unfolding right above us, just out of reach. Now, whenever I visit Algonquin National Park, I feel a familiar tingle of unease. The park's beauty is undeniable. The towering pines, the shimmering lakes, and the vast, star-filled sky, but it all serves as a backdrop to the mystery that haunts my memories. I sometimes find myself sitting alone by a quiet lakeshore, gazing up at the heavens, wondering if those lights will ever reappear. And though I tell myself that it was just a one-time anomaly, the memory is etched into my mind, a constant reminder that our world is far more mysterious than it seems. I've come to accept that I may never fully understand what happened that night in July. The encounter left me with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of dread that the universe might be whispering secrets we're not meant to hear. And so, even as I try to build a life grounded in routine and reason, I remain watchful, ever alert to the possibility that the unknown is closer than I'd like to believe. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world is asleep and the stars shine with unspoken mysteries, I find myself wondering, what if the truth is hidden in the silent, unyielding glow of distant lights, waiting for someone to look up and see it? Redditor 4. I've never told anyone this before, but when I was very young, no more than 5 or 6, I believe I saw a UFO. I use the term UFO in its literal sense, an unidentified flying object, something that defies explanation. I remember that night clearly, as if it were yesterday. I was out walking with my grandma. She lived in a quiet, sparsely lit area where the night sky was a vast, inky canvas, punctured only by the glimmer of distant stars. I was mesmerized by the sheer beauty of it all. The sky seemed infinite, a secret world waiting to be explored. As we ambled along the winding gravel path, I naturally looked up, captivated by the gentle sparkle of the constellations. Grandma chatted softly about the simple things, a memory of her youth, the scent of summer air, and the quiet sounds of the night. But my eyes remained fixed on the heavens. And then, without warning, I saw it. There, among the familiar pinpricks of starlight, a lone light caught my eye. It looked exactly like a star, but there was something odd about it. It began to zoom around very quickly, darting in an erratic pattern that defied the slow, steady movement of celestial bodies. The light was pure white, and its size was comparable to the other stars that peppered the sky, suggesting that it must be very far away. Yet the way it moved was impossible for any natural star to behave. I remember feeling a rush of confusion and a peculiar tingle of fear, mixed with wonder. My little heart pounded in my chest as I strained to follow its rapid, unpredictable dance. For just a few seconds, it zipped around a small area, almost as if it were testing the boundaries of the night, and then, without a sound, it vanished into the darkness. That single, fleeting moment has replayed in my mind countless times over the years. I would often find myself walking in the night, even now, and instinctively look upward, hoping to catch a glimpse of that mysterious light again. I've tried to recreate that moment by walking slowly and even jerking my head around, trying to provoke a similar vision, but nothing ever comes close. I've seen shooting stars, and I know what those look like. They streak across the sky in a brilliant but predictable arc. But what I saw that night was different. It wasn't a brief flash of light falling like rain, but a deliberate, almost playful movement that left me both enchanted and terrified. At first, I tried to debunk it in my head. I told myself, it's just a trick of the light. Maybe it was an airplane or a satellite reflecting sunlight. But deep down, I knew it wasn't like that at all. The way the light moved, zipping and darting in a confined area, was unlike any aircraft or human-made object I'd ever encountered. The memory became a secret puzzle that my young mind couldn't piece together. I remember feeling an intense mix of excitement and dread, as if the sky itself had revealed a hidden, otherworldly secret meant only for me to witness. I recall that night vividly, the cool, gentle breeze that made the leaves whisper in the darkness, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot as we walked, and the muted conversation of my grandma blending with the ambient hum of the rural night. Everything felt normal. Yet I was forever changed by that inexplicable moment. I never mentioned it to anyone at the time, partly because I was too scared to admit that I had seen something so impossible, and partly because my grandma simply smiled and patted my head, assuring me that stars sometimes twinkle in strange ways. In the following years, the memory haunted me. I would lie awake in bed, staring through my window at the same vast sky, my mind racing with questions. What was that light? Was it a visitor from another world, or simply a trick of my imagination? I started to wonder if I had somehow glimpsed a secret message, a hidden sign that the universe was much larger and much more mysterious than I had ever believed. Every time I ventured outside at night, a shiver would run down my spine, and I'd be overwhelmed by a quiet, persistent unease. As I grew older, I tried to explain it away with logic. I read articles about atmospheric phenomena, about optical illusions caused by cold air and shimmering heat, but none of those explanations ever felt right. The image of that white, star-like object moving with purpose, almost as if it were alive, refused to fade. In school, I would sometimes doodle sketches of that night in my notebooks, drawing a solitary star that split into a streak of light before vanishing into the darkness. I kept those drawings hidden, afraid that anyone who saw them would think I was just a kid with wild fantasies. Yet deep down, I was convinced that what I had seen was real, something extraordinary that defied everyday understanding. Even now, Whenever I find myself alone on a quiet evening, I can't help but glance up at the sky, hoping for a repeat of that miraculous yet terrifying event. The memory is a constant companion, a mix of wonder and sorrow that reminds me of the fragility of our understanding of the universe. It has left me with an abiding sense of curiosity and a lingering fear that maybe, just maybe, we're not as alone as we think. That single, inexplicable sight, brief as it was, seems to suggest that there are layers of reality hidden just beyond the reach of our mundane lives. I've never shared this story widely, fearing that others might dismiss it as the ramblings of an overactive imagination. Yet every now and then, when someone mentions UFOs or strange lights in the sky, I feel compelled to confide in them, to reveal that I once witnessed something so uncanny, it changed the way I see the night forever. But the more I talk about it, the more I wonder if perhaps it wasn't just a random anomaly. What if, on that cold, clear night, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something that exists beyond our comprehension? A reminder that the universe is full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Sometimes, in the dead of night, as I lie in bed with the soft hum of the world around me, I can still feel the echo of that memory. The image of the star-like light, its deliberate, almost sentient movement, is etched into my mind, a silent sentinel guarding the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary. I've come to realize that some mysteries are meant to remain unexplained, that the beauty and terror of the unknown are what make life infinitely fascinating. So, whenever I walk under a clear, starlit sky, I do so with a cautious heart, a mind forever alert to the possibility that somewhere above, a single, strange light might be waiting to reveal itself once again. And even though I try to rationalize it all away, a part of me will always wonder if that moment was a glimpse into a world beyond our own, a secret world that whispers to those brave enough to look up and wonder. And Redditor 5, I've never told anyone this before, but a few months back I posted a story online about a strange experience I had in my new rural home, and it got completely downvoted into oblivion. I was really hoping for some thoughtful responses, maybe even a few kindred souls who'd seen something similar, but instead it was buried in the basement of the forum. That rejection stung a little, but it didn't stop me from continuing to observe the skies. In fact, over the past year and a half since I moved away from the city, I've had a couple of really interesting encounters, the most vivid of which still makes my skin crawl and my heart race with wonder. It was a cold, crisp night in early autumn. I was sitting outside on the back porch of our modest farmhouse, wrapped in a thick wool sweater with a mug of lukewarm tea in my hand. The sky was an endless canvas, almost impossibly clear here away from all the city lights. I had always been fascinated by the night sky, and living out in the country, free from the light pollution that once overwhelmed my urban nights, has allowed me to see things I never thought possible. That night, as I sipped my tea and listened to the distant call of a lone owl, I noticed something unusual: a set of hovering orange lights in the sky. At first, they were just faint glimmers on the far edge of my vision. I squinted, trying to decide if they were just part of the natural starry backdrop or something else entirely. But as I focused, I realized there were exactly 5 distinct lights. They formed a perfect quadrilateral, a shape with 4 corners that seemed to hover motionlessly, suspended high above the horizon. The lights themselves were not like the stars. They weren't simply points of light twinkling in the distance. No. These objects were active. They emitted a steady, warm, orange glow that pulsed rhythmically, as if they were alive. It struck me immediately that they were probably huge, far larger than any aircraft or conventional object I'd ever seen. I remember sitting there, completely transfixed, as my breath fogged up the cool glass of the window. The moment lasted maybe 15 seconds, but to me it stretched into an eternity. In that brief time, every instinct screamed that this was not a natural phenomenon. The lights weren't moving, not in the way airplanes or even satellites do. They simply hovered in a fixed formation. Fixed seemed to make sense. I felt like, wow, the sequence of a vision. We can fake physics. Then, as if on cue, they began to fade out together, dissolving slowly into the night until they were gone without a trace. I almost couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to record any evidence. but the camera on my old device was no match for the darkness or the subtlety of the glow. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't capture a single clear image. It was as if the universe had conspired to leave me with nothing but a memory, a secret shared only between me and the cosmos. Shaken, I turned to my husband, who had been reading on the couch inside our small living room. I burst out, "Honey, I just saw a UFO." My voice trembled between excitement and terror. I'm not saying aliens, of course, just a flying object that I couldn't identify. It was really cool, but also really unsettling. He looked up from his book with a mix of disbelief and concern, his eyes reflecting the flicker of the dying porch light. He asked me to explain it again, and I recounted every detail. The hovering quadrilateral of orange light, the way they faded out in unison, the overwhelming sense of being watched by something enormous and inexplicable. We sat there in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that follows the sharing of a secret too wild to be believed. My husband said, "Maybe it was just a natural phenomenon, like ball lightning or some weird atmospheric effect." But I wasn't convinced. I've seen plenty of UFO sightings reported in rural areas. Stories dismissed by city dwellers as the ramblings of over-imaginative people. Out here, under a sky unpolluted by urban glare, you start to notice that the heavens are filled with wonders that defy explanation. That night, as I lay in bed afterwards, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. The memory of those 5 hovering lights haunted me in a way that was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, and wondering what they could have been. Were they signs of some clandestine military experiment? Or perhaps evidence of something far more extraordinary? I couldn't tell. I even dreamed of them later, the lights reappearing in various configurations, sometimes chasing each other, sometimes moving in ways that seemed to communicate a silent, urgent message. Over the next few days, I scoured the internet, searching for similar sightings. I found scattered reports from other rural areas, accounts of unexplained lights that many dismissed as optical illusions or rare meteorological events. Yet the precision of their formation, the perfect quadrilateral, made my skin crawl with the thought that it was no random occurrence. Every time I saw a clear night sky, I felt compelled to look up, hoping for another glimpse of that enigmatic display. Living in the country has given me a front-row seat to the strange and unexplained. The contrast between the vibrant, mysterious night skies here and the sterile glow of the city is stark. I miss the urban buzz sometimes, the convenience, the endless chatter, the very human energy of crowded streets. But nights like these remind me why I left. The country offers a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the universe. A reminder that, even in our modern, predictable lives, there are secrets waiting in the darkness. I've shared my story with a few friends over the years. Some laugh it off, calling me overly superstitious, while others nod knowingly, their eyes distant, as if they too have seen something inexplicable. The responses are mixed, but every time I tell the tale, I feel that old thrill and the lingering fear, as if the memory is a living thing, breathing quietly in the recesses of my mind. Now, whenever I find myself outside on a clear night, I make it a point to gaze upward. The silence of the rural nights, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, makes you feel both infinitesimally small and curiously connected to something vast. I often catch myself in a state of awe, my heartbeat a steady drum in the quiet, as I wonder what else might be hidden in that boundless canvas. I have come to accept that perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be solved, that the universe enjoys its little secrets. And while I long for rational explanations, I also know that every time I look up and see a lone, shimmering light, there's a part of me that hopes, no, believes, that the cosmos has its own language, and that I was lucky enough to catch a fleeting glimpse of its truth. So, every night, as I close my door behind me and lock it out of habit, I do so with a lingering sense of caution. I still find footprints outside my window on rainy nights, a faint reminder that sometimes the extraordinary creeps in when you least expect it. I sometimes hear an echo of a distant hum in the dead of night, or see a flash of light in the periphery of my vision, and I shudder with both fear and excitement. I may never know what those hovering orange lights truly were, but they have etched themselves into my memory, a silent, burning secret that continues to haunt the rural skies above me. Redditor 6. I've never told anyone this before, but when I was young, back in the mid-90s in a small town in central New York, I believe I saw a UFO. I mean it in the literal sense, an unidentified flying object. And though I have no way to prove whether it was extraterrestrial, that memory has haunted me all these years. Life in my town was as average as it gets. I had a close-knit group of friends, the fat kid, the sporty kid, the nerd. Basically the typical ensemble of boys you'd see in any mid-90s TV show. None of us were the type to indulge in flights of fancy or let our imaginations run wild. We grew up in relatively poor surroundings with realist parents, so our days were filled with bikes, scooters, football, basketball, and countless hours playing video games. We'd ride our bikes to one of our friends' houses, hang out on the porch drinking soda, and eat snacks, all under a clear blue sky that seemed to stretch on forever. One particular day, around 1999, remains etched in my memory. We were all hanging out on the porch of a friend's house, a simple, worn wooden porch with peeling paint that somehow felt like home. The sky was a brilliant blue, cloudless and almost too perfect, and we were just talking, laughing, and joking around as we usually did. There were 4 of us that day, and as I stepped off the porch steps to head towards the driveway, I glanced upward, completely captivated by the clear midday sky. That's when I saw it. It looked like a star at first, a bright white speck that didn't seem out of place in the endless blue, but then it began to zoom around rapidly, darting across a small patch of the sky in a way that no ordinary star would. My heart pounded in my chest as I craned my neck upward, trying to follow its erratic path. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The light moved as if it were weightless, almost like a balloon gaining altitude, yet it was entirely out of place. From what I remember, it seemed to be about 200 feet above the ground, far too low for a typical star, but too high to be an insect or any small earthly object. I yelled for my 3 friends to come and look. "Guys, check it out!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the quiet houses around us. They all turned their heads in unison, eyes widening as they took in the sight. We stood there, a small group of young boys staring up at the sky in utter disbelief. It hovered there for 2 to 3 minutes, an eternity for us, before it suddenly vanished into the cloudless blue. I remember the shock and silence that followed, a heavy, suffocating quiet that made us all feel strangely alone. In that moment, as the object disappeared, we instinctively jumped to the conclusion that we had seen an alien spacecraft, not in some grand, awe-inspiring way, but in a raw, genuine, and honestly terrifying way that only young kids can experience. We were scared, really scared. We scampered off to my house and huddled together in a tight circle, agreeing with solemn expressions that we would never speak of it again. We thought that silence would somehow bury the memory, but it only made it linger, festering in the back of our minds as something unspeakably mysterious. Over a decade has passed since that day, and I've lost touch with most of my old friends from the neighborhood. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I wonder if they remember that day as vividly as I do. I've spent countless hours researching different weather balloons, experimental aircraft, and even natural atmospheric phenomena in an attempt to debunk or confirm what we witnessed. No explanation has ever truly satisfied me. Every theory I encountered either seemed too mundane or too contrived to account for what I saw. I've scoured old forum posts and obscure articles, piecing together bits of similar sightings. One detail in particular has haunted my recollections: the way the object appeared. It wasn't a smooth, unchanging light. It had curious details. In a rough, hastily drawn illustration I made as a kid, now buried in the attic along with my childhood drawings, I marked with a red arrow the position of several balls at the bottom of the object. These little orbs seemed to rotate in perfect unison around the base of the main object as it flew across the sky. What's even more bizarre is that they appeared to be completely separate from one another, not physically attached to the main body in any discernible way. The entire formation was about the size of a Cessna, I would later estimate, which only deepened the mystery in my young, impressionable mind. I often revisit that memory, especially on nights when the stars are unusually clear. The sight of a single, unexplainable light darting across the sky has a way of stirring up old fears and questions. Was it really an alien spacecraft? Or was it some kind of advanced military experiment? Maybe it was just a rare natural phenomenon, something our small town in central New York would never ordinarily experience. But the precision of its movements, the inexplicable rotation of those orbs around its base, defies any simple explanation. I still remember the exact sensation, the feeling of my heart hammering against my chest, my palms sweating as I stared up at the sky, and a sense of profound isolation, as if I had been singled out by the cosmos. It wasn't the usual thrill of discovering something new. It was a cold, creeping dread that whispered, "You're not alone, and you never were." Even now, I catch myself glancing upward whenever I step outside at night, half expecting to see that enigmatic formation reappear. Some nights, as I lie awake in bed with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old house, I can almost feel that sense of wonder and fear merging into one, a poignant reminder of that moment when my childhood collided with the inexplicable. I sometimes think about writing down every detail, every nuance of that experience, in hopes that maybe, someday, someone will understand. But most of the time, I keep it locked away, a secret shared only between me and the endless, star-studded sky. Now, I wonder if my experience was unique or if my friends remembered it too. I sometimes scroll through old message boards and forgotten emails, searching for any mention of that day, but most of those memories have faded away into the blur of time. The memory of the UFO, in the literal definition of the term, remains a singular, indelible mark on my life, a fleeting glimpse into a world that, even now, I can't fully comprehend. And every time I look up at the stars, I feel that old, inexplicable fear that there might be more out there than what we can see, more secrets hidden in the vast darkness above us. I have no proof to show for it, only the hazy recollections of a long-ago summer and a poor redrawn sketch that no one else believes is worth a mention. Yet the truth of that day remains as vivid to me as the clear blue sky we once admired. And so, when I find myself beneath the quiet canopy of night, I can't help but wonder if the universe has more to reveal, if the secrets of that day were just the beginning of something far larger, far more mysterious than any of us could ever imagine. Redditor 7. I've never told anyone this before, but there was one night that still sends chills down my spine. It was a few months ago, during one of those long, restless nights that seem to stretch into forever. I was sleeping soundly in my room when I suddenly woke to an unbearable brightness flooding the space. My heart pounded so hard I could barely catch my breath. I blinked, trying to clear the shock, and realized that right in front of my window was a massive, blinding light. It wasn't like any lamp or streetlight I'd ever seen. It was an enormous, floating sphere of pure white light that dominated the darkness. I sat up in bed, my sheets tangled around my legs, and pressed my face against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the night was eerily quiet, the only sound a soft rustle of wind through the trees. And there it was, a floating, luminescent object, hovering motionless. For a moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming, if this was just another fragment of a nightmare. But then I remembered, just moments before, I had woken up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, and now this surreal spectacle was unfolding right before my eyes. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to record what I was witnessing, but the brightness was overwhelming, my screen washed out in the glare of that inexplicable light. In my panic, I nearly dropped the phone, but somehow managed to hold on long enough to catch a few shaky seconds of video. I couldn't make out any shape or detail beyond the blinding glow. Yet something about it felt profoundly deliberate, almost as if it were watching me. My mind raced as I tried to rationalize the impossible. I remembered that in my childhood, my parents used to tell me strange stories. Stories of odd occurrences and inexplicable lights. One memory in particular surfaced like a half-remembered dream. When I was only 1 or 2 years old, while we were driving to Florida, I was napping in the back seat. My parents later said that during that long drive, they saw something they described as a funky live show in the sky. They recalled a brief moment when a strange, vibrant light danced above the car, its colors shifting and swirling as if in a silent performance. At the time, I couldn't have known what to make of it, but now, standing in my darkened room, I wondered if it was somehow connected to what I was seeing now. Unable to contain my growing terror, I dashed down the hall to my parents' room. I burst in, breathless and frantic, and whispered, "Mom, "Dad, did you see that light?" My voice trembled with a mix of fear and desperate hope. To my surprise, both of them were wide awake, their eyes straining toward the door that led to my room. "We heard you screaming," my dad said softly, his voice laced with concern. My mom nodded silently, her face etched with the same look of disbelief that I felt. They told me they'd been woken up by my cries and had come in to check, but neither of them had seen the light at that moment. They insisted that perhaps I had dreamt it all, that sometimes when you're half asleep the shadows play tricks on your mind. But I knew what I had seen. The raw, blinding light was too real, too all-encompassing to be a mere figment of sleep. After what felt like an eternity of heated discussion and shared anxiety, my parents decided to check outside. Together, we all stood at the front door, peering out into the inky black of the night. The window was still there, cold to the touch, but the inexplicable light had vanished without a trace. The sky was clear and empty, as if the night had swallowed the strange phenomenon whole. My dad tried to reassure me, suggesting that perhaps it was a passing satellite or a rare atmospheric reflection, but his words did little to calm the terror gnawing at my insides. I went back to my room, yet sleep was elusive. I lay awake for hours, my mind replaying the image of that brilliant, floating light over and over. I could still feel the residual warmth of its glow on my skin, a phantom touch that refused to fade. Every so often, as I listened to the silence of the night, I thought I heard a faint humming, a subtle, rhythmic pulse, like the beating of a colossal, unseen heart. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, but the memory of that night was as vivid as ever. Over breakfast, my parents exchanged uneasy glances when I mentioned my experience, and though they tried to brush it off as an overactive imagination, I sensed that they too were haunted by something they couldn't quite explain. My dad's eyes would linger on the window a little too long, and my mom would shiver when a bright light flickered outside, even in the clear daylight. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with finding a rational explanation. I spent hours online scouring forums and research articles about UFO sightings and unexplained aerial phenomena. I came across accounts of people who had seen similar blinding lights, of objects that appeared suddenly in the sky only to vanish moments later. Some suggested it was a secret military experiment. Others speculated about extraterrestrial visitors, and a few mentioned a natural atmospheric phenomenon so rare that it defied current scientific understanding. None of these explanations satisfied me completely. Each theory felt incomplete, like a half-truth that left the real horror lurking just beneath the surface. Late one evening, driven by a restless need to see if the phenomenon might repeat itself, I set up my old digital camera by the window once more. The night was cool and the air was still, and I sat in a heavy silence, staring at the dark horizon. I recalled the chilling details from that night, the way the light had overwhelmed my vision, the overwhelming sensation of being watched, the inexplicable warmth that had lingered long after the light faded. I waited, heart pounding in anticipation, but the night remained undisturbed. I kept checking the camera, hoping to capture any sign of movement, any glimmer of that mysterious presence. Despite my careful vigil, nothing reoccurred. The window stayed dark, and the only sounds were the soft whispers of the wind and the distant hum of nighttime life. I couldn't shake the feeling that the light was still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. Even now, months later, I sometimes catch myself glancing out the window at night, my mind racing with memories of that blinding light. I still hear the echo of my own terrified screams in the silence, and I feel the cold, residual heat of that inexplicable glow on my skin. My parents have tried to reassure me, saying that it was probably a trick of the light, a momentary anomaly that didn't mean anything. But deep down, I know there's something far more sinister at play. A secret that the universe whispered to me in that lonely, sleepless night. I've come to accept that some mysteries might never be solved, that the truth may be too vast or too terrifying for us to grasp. And so, I live with that lingering fear, a constant reminder that in the quiet hours of the night, when the world is asleep and the sky stretches out in an endless, impenetrable void, something extraordinary and inexplicable might be watching us. I try to keep this thought at bay, to convince myself that it was just a one-time fleeting event, but every time a bright light flickers near my window, I'm transported back to that night, and my heart begins to race once more. I don't know if I'll ever see that blinding light again, or if its memory will continue to haunt my dreams and my waking hours. What I do know is that, for a brief, terrifying moment, the barrier between the known and the unknown was torn apart, and I glimpsed a truth that is both beautiful and horrifying. A truth that, in the silence of the night, reminds us that we are never truly alone. Redditor 8. I've never told anyone this before, but there was one night that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. It all began on a clear day in Las Vegas. A day so bright it almost hurt your eyes, with a sky so vast and blue it made the neon chaos below seem trivial. I was out walking, just idly observing the world around me when I saw it. A large, triangular object gliding through the sky. It wasn't moving like an airplane, nor did it flicker like a shooting star. Instead, it cut a perfect, ominous shape across the sky. Then, as if shy, it slipped behind a small, wispy cloud. I stood there, transfixed, watching it vanish from view as if it had never existed at all. Later that day, as dusk crept in, the desert heat began to cool and the neon lights of the strip came alive. I couldn't shake the image of that triangle from my mind, but that wasn't the end of it. As night fell and I was walking home through the quieter, darker streets, away from the glaring lights of the city, I noticed something else. What appeared to be a helicopter, low and silent, hovering in the sky. It was bizarre. Its rotors should have created a deafening buzz, but there was nothing. No sound, just a ghostly shape drifting near the ground. I stopped in my tracks, heart thumping, and stared upward. I walked past a huge billboard advertising a long-forgotten rock band, turned around, and the helicopter had vanished as if it were never there. I don't believe in these things, but I couldn't explain what I had seen. I figured that, being in Las Vegas, I might have just witnessed some Area 51 tech on loan to a secret contractor, but even that theory felt too outlandish. The strangeness of the day haunted me. I kept replaying the images in my mind, that huge triangle of pure, unearthly light, the silent helicopter drifting low over the street, the vanishing act by the billboard. Each memory stirred an inexplicable dread deep within me, a feeling that something was watching, something beyond the ordinary. I tried to rationalize it all, telling myself it was a trick of the light or some secret military exercise. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the sensation that I'd seen something otherworldly. Then, a few nights later, the terror returned in a way I never expected. It was around 3 a.m. on a bitterly cold night. I had just woken up, needing to pee, and, half asleep, I powered up my old laptop so I could see out my room. A small, bare space with nothing more than a mattress on the floor and the dim glow of my computer screen. I shuffled to the door, my mind still foggy from sleep, when something caught my attention. I opened the door cautiously, and the first thing I noticed was the shadow of my body cast long and distorted on the wall, bathed in a soft blue light that wasn't there before. My breath caught in my throat. There was something off about that light. It wasn't the typical ambient glow from streetlights or passing cars. It was a deep, unsettling blue. And as I stepped forward, it began to form into a perfect circle on the wall. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I could almost feel it in my ears. The blue circle started to move slowly around the room, its luminescence shifting as if alive. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to move or even speak, watching in horrified fascination. Every step I thought about taking was swallowed by a profound, icy dread. The circle glided along the wall, and I noticed something even more disturbing. The usual shadow of my body, the familiar outline that should have been there, was completely gone. Even the shadow of the door behind me had vanished, replaced by an eerie, undulating blue haze. I must have stood there for what felt like an eternity, my throat tight and my mind racing with desperate thoughts. Was this some sort of hallucination? Had the darkness outside my window seeped into my room? I tried to force myself to breathe, once, twice, trying to regain control over my trembling limbs, but my body refused to obey. The blue circle moved all around the wall, sometimes creeping close as if it were reaching for me, and then receding into the opposite corner. Then, in a moment of panic, I bolted back into my room and slammed the door behind me. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for the light switch and flipped it on, flooding the room with harsh, white light. I scanned the empty space frantically. My room was as bare as ever, with no furniture, no clues, nothing that could explain the sinister display I had just witnessed. I sank onto the mattress, my mind reeling and my thoughts swirling in a vortex of terror and disbelief. I kept thinking about the blue light, the moving circle, and the absence of my own shadow. It was like the normal laws of physics had been rewritten right there in my apartment. The rest of the night passed in a disjointed haze. I stayed awake, unable to muster the courage to sleep, replaying every detail over and over again. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind outside, made me jump and look over my shoulder. I heard nothing more that night, but the memory of that blue circle haunted me. It felt as if a door had been opened, a door to a realm I wasn't meant to see, where the rules of reality no longer applied. In the morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the window, I forced myself to think it was all a trick of my sleep-deprived mind. I rationalized that the strange blue light was just a malfunction of my old laptop, or some sort of power surge in the building. My parents, who were asleep in the room next door, never mentioned it, though I could sense their unease in the hushed tones they used later in the day. I tried to brush it off as an isolated incident, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. Since that night, I've been haunted by questions I can't answer. I still catch faint glimmers of that unnatural blue glow in the corner of my vision when I'm alone in the dark, and I can't help but wonder if what I saw was a glimpse of something not of this world. I sometimes find footprints outside my window on rainy nights, small, unexplainable marks that seem to trail off into nothingness. I've tried to research everything from electromagnetic anomalies to paranormal phenomena, but no theory seems to capture the totality of what I experienced. I've learned to live with that lingering fear, a constant, unyielding reminder that the world is far more mysterious and dangerous than it appears. I often lie awake at night, heart racing, listening for any sign that the strange blue light might return. And sometimes, when the house is silent and the darkness feels oppressive, I swear I hear footsteps in the hallway, as if someone, or something, is still out there, watching me. I don't know if I'll ever get the answers I seek, or if the truth will remain hidden in the shadows of that fateful night. What I do know is that every time I look out my window, every time I walk down a dark corridor, I carry with me the terror of that night. The night when a blinding, inexplicable light shattered my perception of normalcy and left me questioning everything. And though I try to convince myself it was just a malfunction, a quirk of faulty wiring or a trick of my exhausted mind, the memory remains, as vivid and terrifying as if it happened just yesterday.